Welcome to another installment of Creative Solutions. I'm Travis Chapman.
I'm Kenneth Vaughn.
And today we're talking about building positive relationships, part 2. So there was a part 1, and we had some inquiries regarding, some of the content in part 1. And just one of the inquiries was, when would teachers have time to build these relationships with the students? So let's go back and touch on the 3 points that we dropped in part 1, and then we'll move forward and talk about some of the key points in part 2. So point number 1 was having meaningful conversations with the students. Point number 2 was asking the right questions, asking the students, where are you at this particular point, and where do you want to go? And then point number 3 was creating a safe environment. And so teachers want to know, how do we have time to build these relationships? When can we do it? And so we're going to move from maybe some simple points to some more complex points here. And you may laugh, but point number 1 is to know your student's name. So as simple as that sounds, kind of expound on that for us as to why that's important.
I think it's important just because kids want to know that you know them.
Right.
Whether or not you're in high school, middle school, college, or whatever the case may be. And even at work, we pay very specific attention to whether or not our bosses or whether or not district people know us when they walk into the building. And it's important because it's a way of saying that I value you when you know somebody's name. So students need that, because one of the time, even in high school, students I said, look, I want you to come here, I want you to pick up this stuff for me. And I said, let me write your name down, let me write your pass. And he was excited because I knew his name. Does it make any sense? So I think it's important because it's a way of showing that you value that person enough. And it's not some type of fast transaction. You're not here today and it's just something that's going on. It's because I value you enough to remember who you are.
So for me, when I first started teaching, it was sort of that industrial setting. Get them in, get them out. Deliver the instruction, and then the next group is coming in. Not really about building, those positive relationships with the students. And probably my first or second year teaching, a student brought it to my attention around the second or third week of school. And I was calling on different students, asking questions. And I got to the one student, didn't know her name. And I said, you answered this particular question. So she came up to me after class and was like, you didn't know my name? It's the second week of school. You still don't know my name? And so like you said, students value the fact when you're vested in getting to know who they are. So from that point onward, I made it a point to make sure that I knew all my students' names by the end of that first week of school. So that's critical. So another example I had was, first week of school of a particular school year, I was calling on students, and this student came to me at the end of class, was like, you know my name already. And so he seemed to be excited that, it was the first week of school and I knew all the students' names. So I just started investing in getting to know all of my students instead of treating it like an industrial setting. So moving on, so know your student's name, point number 1. Point number 2 is greeting your students at the door. Talk to us about why that's important.
I think one of the most important parts behind greeting the students at the door is understanding that you're setting the context for the day. And as you stand at the door, you can turn around and read how your students are feeling. One of the things that you set is that you can go through and start setting, hey, I want you to come in, we got to get a whole lot of things done today. Hey, Johnny, hey, Susie, hey, so-and-so. But also, as a teacher, as you're looking at these students come in, you can tell whether or not a student is having a bad day. And it's important to know that, because if you can stop it before it comes into your classroom, you have a choice whether or not I'm managing it now or whether or not I'll manage it after I've started instruction. So it's important. And it's also important to kind of be able to read your students, and that's the best way to read them. You read them at the beginning of the day. Also, if he's having a bad day before he come in, you say, you come in here with that? Nah, baby. We got this, and this to do. We're going to move forward. We're going to push through. Do you need time to talk to me? Let's set this time up right here to talk. Because that's the setting of the expectation of the day. At your door, communicating what we're going to do. How you doing? Let's get all these different things done. But it saves you a whole lot of time.
And in that quick 15 to 20 second interaction, couple of things that you'll note about the students: new outfit, new shoes, new hairdo. And when you point those things out, it makes the student feel good, you know, and they want to come in, they want to be there in your classroom, they want to perform. So prior to them getting inside of those four walls in your classroom, in that group setting, it's that one-on-one interaction. You can ask them real quickly, how's your day going so far? What are you doing? How was the test in, Mr. So-and-so's class? And you can find out so much in that 20-second time period. Like you said, you can look at their disposition or their countenance to see if they're having a good or bad day. I had this thing what I call High Five Fridays, when I would stand outside of my door, and on Fridays they coming through and I'm high-fiving, and they look forward to that. It built that energy up so that when we got into the classroom setting, that energy was there, that positive energy was there. So just that 5 minutes between classes, standing at your door, will allow you to build those positive relationships.
I think the third point that we'll get ready to get into is recognizing who are the key players in your classroom. And one of the reasons why it's so important that you recognize who the key players are in your classroom is because you need to know who are the high flyers. Where are they at academically, right? Because that's going to tell you how much time you need to spend with them, right? Who are the students who are still struggling academically? Where are they at? Who are my students who have a tendency to go through and cut up if I'm not structured and organized? And who are my students who just are there and they can go through and work with multiple people, so I can set my groups up in different ways? Because if I know that these students are struggling over here, I'm not going to keep students that are struggling together. My job then is to go through and section them out in the classroom and put them beside people who are stronger academically, so I can go through and shift their reality, shift their circumstances. Because remember, although I'm a great teacher, I can't go through and teach everybody everything at one time. My job is to create the atmosphere, create the culture where everybody learning, which means you working with him, because we're going to get these things done. And I set group projects up to help build, and it gives them opportunities, but also set up my time so that I can go through and work with a student. But it only happens when you know your students. You got to understand, who are my power players? What are their needs? What are instructional needs? What are behavioral needs? Because when I adjust that time, on the forefront, and I know them, then I'm not backing up and reacting to it every time it happens later. Because it's about being proactive. The teachers ask the question, when do I find time to do it? Why should I do it? Well, you can't afford not to. If you're trying to run and go to a place where you've never been, if you want to go through and get to that 90-90-90 perspective where 90% of your students are passing all the time, no matter what grade, no matter what content, no matter what subject, then you got to be interconnected and develop that relationship with the students.
Absolutely. And so, building on one of the points that you made, recognizing those power players, that's important, because a lot of times those power players have academic challenges whereas if they're not addressed strategically from an instructional standpoint, they're going to disrupt the learning environment. And so therefore, you got to have those instructional strategies in place so that, your classroom can be successful in a good learning environment. And what I used to do when I shifted from high school to middle school level earlier on in my career, I would take those power players and I would give them certain roles and responsibilities in the classroom, allow them to go around and stamp the papers, or take up papers or pass out papers, and give them different roles and responsibilities. And that in and of itself would allow me to build relationship, a trust with those students, where they want to come in and perform for me, and then therefore they're going to achieve better academically because they feel comfortable. And then I will also ask them questions that I know that they can answer, and so they can feel confident in that success from that respect as well.
And I think you built on that last point about helping them build on their successes. One of the great things that you will recognize in any organization, your top leaders understand what their followers need. Does it make any sense? And what they do is they celebrate smaller successes, because they understand is if I catch you doing something good, you're more likely to repeat it if I celebrate it. And it's the same thing that goes on in the classroom. Yeah, so-and-so, Taekwon or Terry or Andrew may not be moving at the same level as some of the other students, but when you see him participate, when you see him working or see her working, you got to go through and celebrate that success, whether or not it's a pat on your back, you doing your thing,
Right,
or whether or not
exactly.
it's a Snickers bar.
Right.
And I know that we go through and say, well, they should go through and start doing this stuff anyway. No, the reality of it is that we all need a little extra. We all need a little bit of support, because when I help you recognize that being successful and making sure that your behaviors align with my norms or what my classroom procedures
Right.
say, you're more likely to go through and repeat it. Because
Right.
at the end of the day, don't you want your kids to work with you?
Yeah,
So if
exactly.
you want your kids to work with you, find little things that you can do to celebrate successes. And I'll promise you that if you celebrate their successes, they're more likely to go through and believe in what you're saying. They're more likely to comply with what you want,
Right.
because you're celebrating them.
Right. And when we talk about celebrating success, it doesn't always need to be tied to academics. You know, that success can be a student stayed behind and pushed every chair in. All right, and you recognizing the fact that they were that courteous and that respectful of your classroom environment that they were going to stay behind and help you out and push all the chairs in, or there was some paper on the floor and they decided to pick the papers up. Or you're recognizing, you know, success in behavioral changes from poor behaviors to positive behaviors. And so there are so many different ways where we can recognize and celebrate success.
Let me tell you, one of the most powerful things that ever happened to me, and this was when I was an administrator. I had one of the students, he got in a knockdown brawl out fight one time, right? And yeah, me and his mom had it out with him. Look, this is what you're gonna do. You know we don't do that. You're gonna be successful. This is what I want you. I want you to lead.
Right.
You're gonna lead. You know, we had this conversation with him. So two other students getting ready to get into a fight, and what does he do? He stand in the middle and said, "No, we're not doing that."
Oh wow, that's great.
You know what it meant to me? It meant a lot to me because he caught it. Does it
Right.
make any sense? And then immediately when I found out what he did, I said, look, we need to have lunch. I want to sit down. I want to talk to you about that, because you get what I'm talking about.
Right.
So what happens is, as you celebrate those successes, you got to help them recognize that, look, when you do things differently, when you lead, I got to celebrate that, because I want you to take leadership to another level.
Right. Yeah. And our last point is communicating expectations and the whys behind it. And so, you know, a lot of students, you know, my own children in my house, you know, if you say, well, you need to make sure you do your chores, they need to know, why is this important? So what is the real life applications to these expectations? What is the connection that binds me to these particular expectations? Talk to us a little bit about that.
You know, one of the biggest challenges I had when I first started teaching was I taught in the inner city, and one of the challenges that we had, especially with writing, is that students will write the way that they speak, right? So if you grow up in the inner city, you know that we speak with colloquialisms, right? So there's a whole lot of ands, buts, cuz, and everything like that. So as I was working with one of the students, I was like, baby, you can't write like that. You can't. And what I want you to do is, when you walk in and talking in the classroom, I want you to talk differently. I want you to talk the way that you read, because I want you to change. And lo and behold, her mom came up to the school. You can't tell my child she can't talk like this. And I had to have the conversation with mom, and we had a great relationship at the end of the year. I was like, listen, this is where I want her to go.
Right.
You know, if she's getting ready to go through and apply for college scholarships, she needs to write the sentence correctly.
Absolutely.
When she gets ready to go through and run the organization, she needs to go through and do well. And this was with mom. We had a deep conversation. I said, I don't want her working at McDonald's unless she has to. Ain't nothing wrong with McDonald's. Let me put that in the context of it. Ain't nothing wrong with McDonald's, Burger King, whatever the case may be. But I would rather you go through and have opportunities, so that if that's your choice, that's your choice. Not that it has to be your final destination.
Right.
So we had a meaningful conversation, because I had to say, this is why I wanted to walk like this. This is why I wanted to act like this. This is why I wanted to write like this. Because if she does that, she's going to be more successful when she goes on to the next grade. Now she's in college now. Does it make any sense? The student who struggled in writing is in college. Went to my alma mater, Norfolk State University. And I'm thankful for it, because we always have the responsibility of saying, I want you to do this, because if you do it later on in life, you're going to be more successful.
Right. So let me talk about one thing that is connected to one of our passions in Bowtie Tuesday is Dress for Success. And so one of the expectations that we have communicated in our hallways is that you're going to wear your clothes a certain kind of way. Okay, you're going to pull your pants up. You're not going to dress inappropriately. And for young ladies, you know, you're not going to wear those spaghetti straps, or you're not going to wear this or that and the other. So why is that critical? Why is that important? because once you graduate, or even prior to graduating, if you go out to get a job, even if it's at Target or Walmart or McDonald's, you have to carry yourself and you have to a certain way, and you have to dress a certain way. Okay? And beyond that, beyond high school or even beyond college, once you start interviewing for jobs, you have to walk in with the confidence, but not only walking in with the confidence, but you have to dress a certain way. You have to dress businesslike. And we're preparing you right now at this very moment to dress appropriately in order to be successful. So, teaching students how to dress is essential for their success in the future.
Yeah. One of the things that we'll say, and I would love to get more feedback from the schools, especially if you want to talk to us about how to do Bow Tie Tuesdays or how to just dress for success. Here's the thing for students who are watching this video. When you dress for success in class, teachers are going to teach you differently. Here's the thing for teachers. Let's be honest. When students come in with suited and booted and they look professional, you treat them differently. So if you want to create that environment where we're going through and we're perpetuating, or we're creating future business owners, we're creating future CEOs, then we got to go through and say, hey, I want you to dress like this, and you got to tell them why. You got to continue to reiterate the why of it, because as you continue to pour and plant that seed, later on it's going to grow. None of this stuff happens quickly. When we started off with Bow Tie Tuesdays, it's probably about 8 students the first week, 20, 30, and I think our apex was like 160 students wearing bow ties and being dressed up for our days. And none of this stuff has ever been about us, but it's about creating a culture and creating expectations. Is that when our females come in there and they're dressed with those bow ties and they're dressed up, I said, you look like a CEO. You look like you should have a secretary that I should have to speak to you. Does it make any sense? And I love that feeling, and I love just looking at my young men, looking at how differently teachers treat them. I remember one of our students, and I think we said it last time, and I won't belabor the point. He doesn't dress up often, but one of the days he wore some khakis and a polo shirt. And he came over to us, and he came over to me and said, man, I wasn't going to wear no suit and tie, but I wore that polo for you. Does it make any sense? And while he thought he was wearing it for me, and I appreciate it for me, really what he didn't recognize is he planted that seed of success in it for himself, so that he has a reasonable expectation of how he is supposed to dress when he goes for that interview. Does it make any sense? So we plan to seed teachers for where we want our students to be later on, and it's really on us. And so when you communicate that expectation and you connect it to a why, students have a better understanding of this is why I need to do it, and they'll follow through better for you. All right, so anyway, that's good. We're going to come back with the part 3. All right, Building Positive Relationships part 3. Okay, so we'll stop there. We are Creative Solutions. I'm Travis Chapman. I'm Kenneth Vaughn.
Thank you for joining us.